Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Global Perspectives, Countries Accelerating Their Transition to Low Carbon Fuels. I'm Shahana McKenzie, the CEO of Bioenergy Australia, and we're delighted to be hosting these incredible speakers today. Bioenergy Australia is the non-profit industry association accelerating low carbon fuels and renewable gas for Australia to support hard-to-abate decarbonisation. Before we begin, I would like to pay my respects to our local Indigenous people here in Canberra, the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. They are the custodians of the land that I am on, and I would like to pay my respects to Indigenous persons that may be joining us today, and also the land on which everybody is coming from. And if you'd like to pop where you're coming from in the chat, we would love to hear from you. So we have some fantastic speakers today from across the globe who are going to be talking to us about the acceleration of low carbon fuels within their jurisdictions. A few housekeeping matters to get us started. Make sure that you do introduce yourself in the chat box if you've got something to say. And if you have any questions that you would like us to be addressing with the speakers at the end of the session, please make sure that you use the Q&A box. We won't be using the chat box for the Q&A. So as countries around the world are accelerating their shift to low carbon fuels, Australia has a unique opportunity to learn from what's already working in other markets. Today we have a panel of policy and industry experts from India, Canada, the United States, Brazil and Europe to examine how their jurisdictions are driving low carbon fuel adoption at scale. From ambitious blending mandates, policy tools and financial incentives, our speakers will explore the policy mechanisms, market conditions and regulatory approaches that are delivering real results and driving change during this real world fuel crisis. As I said, at the end of the session, we will have some Q&A, so please feel free to, as speakers are going through, make sure that you pop any questions that you have in the Q&A box. Now, first up, we are going to India. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Ramakrishna from the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas with the Government of India. Ramakrishna has devoted his career to alternative energies since 1986, playing a key role nationally as former chairman of the Working Group on Biofuels at India's Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. He has also chaired the task force on methanol production at NITI, AGO, and served as India's cooperation leader with the EU's Art Fuel Forum. Welcome, Ramakrishna.
Thank you, Shahana. Very good morning and good afternoon to all of you from different parts of the world. Let me start sharing my screen. Yeah. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about some of the initiatives that we have taken in India on the low carbon. We have a net zero target to be achieved by 2070, and I think the bioenergy program that we have initiated is going to play a very significant role in achieving the net zero target that we have. Well, on the biofuel program, as we all know, at the global level, the two primary reasons that drive the program is the energy security and the environment concerns. And in India, we have added another dimension to it. Can our program be a tool for rural development? Being an agrarian society, we thought that that's how we should move forward. And for the first time in India, though the program in India is quite old, for the first time in India, the government of India came up with a policy in 2009 with a target to do about 20% blending of ethanol in petrol and about a similar kind of blending of biodiesel in diesel by 2017. However, when we reviewed the program in 2014, we realized that the ethanol blending program was still at 1.4% as against the target of 20% to be achieved in the next 3 years. And the biodiesel blending program had not started at all. So a national working group was constituted, and I had the privilege of chairing the national working group. And then we looked at the kind of hurdles that we had, and then how to go about addressing each of them. And then we had to reset our targets. So came up with a new policy in 2018. And we had a target to achieve about 10% blending of ethanol by 2022 and 20% by 2030, and 5% biodiesel blending by 2030 again. So the focus of the national biofuel policy is on first generation as well as on the second generation ethanol.
Hi, Krishna.
Biodiesel. Yep.
We just can't see your screen. Would you mind sharing it?
You're not able to see the screen?
No. Can you just push the share screen button so we can see the slides?
Oh, okay. Let me just. Yeah. Can you share? Can you
Yeah,
see it now?
it's coming through now. So if you could just push the slideshow button down the bottom so we can see it full screen.
Yeah. You can see it now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, right. Yeah. So as I was saying, we came up with a new policy in 2018 and reset the kind of national targets that we had. On the first generation ethanol, most of the ethanol that we produced until 2015-16 were essentially from sea molasses coming from our sugar mills. But then first thing that we did was looking at price, monitored pricing mechanism in the country, and then broad basing the feedstocks. So we allowed the B molasses, C molasses, sugarcane juice, and then a lot of grains also, which were surplus, and also instead of allowing it to rot, we decided to divert it for our ethanol production. And there was a lot of regional controls on the production and storage and movement of the natural alcohol in the country. So those kind of regional controls were withdrawn, and there was an interest subvention scheme from the Ministry of Food and Civil Supplies to make sure that more investment comes into the sector. And as you see, we have now come up with a pricing policy based on different feedstocks and keeping in mind the complexity of the production. And with the kind of interventions that we made, you can see the kind of procurement of ethanol, went up in the last decade or so. So I have another slide here which talks about how much of ethanol was standard, how much was actually procured, and things like that. Now, on the second generation, as I mentioned earlier, being an agrarian society, we generate nearly 1 billion tons of agricultural residue year after year from about 10 major crops. And we burn nearly 200 to 300 million tons of it on the farmer's field. So we thought that we should really make good use of this and stop the kind of burning that was happening. And government directed the oil marketing companies and public sector undertakings coming under the Ministry of Petroleum to set up about 12 commercial plants. We looked at the second generation technologies from across the globe and also our own initiative. And today we have the first plant which has become operational, making use of the paddy straw. It has a capacity of about 100,000 liters per day, and it produces currently about 60 to 65,000 liters, and it is being ramped up for full production. There are 3 more plants either commissioned or under commissioning, and will start production sometime this year. So we will have totally 4 second generation ethanol plants operational before end of the year, and many more to be coming in being put up in the coming years. Now, besides the second generation ethanol, the major challenge with the second generation ethanol is the very high capex and OPEX. So we have taken a lot of initiative with many Indian companies and research institutions to see how the kind of technological gaps can be addressed and how to really bring down the capex and OPEX. Now, as far as some of the policy enablers are concerned, we have a viability gap funding that has been created to an extent of about 19 billion Indian rupees, and anybody investing into second generation ethanol or advanced biofuels will be able to tap into it and get some money. And as far as the second generation is concerned, we have taken a lot of initiative to bring down the cost through indigenous enzyme development and also integrating it with the second generation ethanol facility. Now, apart from the second generation, we also have taken the first initiative of carbon capture and utilization. In the Panipat, the petroleum refinery, we capture all the tail-end gases, and that is being cleaned and being converted into ethanol. And that plant has been set up with the technology from LanzaTech in US. And this plant has been commissioned, and we do have some challenges, technology-related challenges in running it at full capacity. I think by before end of this year we would have overcome all those kind of challenges that we have. Now, these are some of the pictures of the operating plants. The first one on the left top is the Indian Oil Corporation has set up this plant in Panipat running on paddy straw. They process about 400 tons of paddy straw a day and generate about 100,000 liters of ethanol here. And this is with the indigenous technology developed by Praj Industries in Pune. And at the bottom, you see on the left side, this is the Assam Biorefinery Private Limited. They have set up a plant to process bamboo to ethanol. Here they process about 1,000 tons of ethanol a day, and this is going to be starting full, completely commissioned and going to be starting full production by another month or two. So it will be about 180,000 liters of ethanol per day, and acetic acid and furfural as the byproduct. So, and the right side bottom picture is the LanzaTech gas fermentation plant that I talked about. Now, the program so far, as I was mentioning, in 2014, we were at 1.4%, and we had set a target to achieve 20% blending of ethanol by 2030. But by the way things were moving in India, we decided to advance it to 2025 itself. October 2025, we were supposed to achieve 20%, but we did achieve it in May 2025. So on pan-India basis, we are supplying, we are doing 20% blending at this point of time. And as you can see, the GHG reductions have been, considerably been reduced. And most of the ethanol for this blending is, as I mentioned, is coming from the sugarcane growers, and there is a lot of money flowing into these farmers and into the rural area. And we have also been able to save a lot of foreign exchange by reducing the import of fossil fuels at this point of time. And in terms of carbon emission reduction, the ethanol blending program, we have been able to, at 20% blending, we have been able to reduce by about 70 to 80 million metric tons per annum. Now, beyond E20, there's a lot of discussion that has been going on because, all our vehicles are not compatible to go beyond E20. However, we have been working very closely with the Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers. And recently, in fact, early this month, we had Maruti releasing their Flexi engine car, and 4 other car manufacturers are ready with their vehicles, Flexi engine vehicles. And most of the two-wheeler manufacturers have also released their Flexi engine vehicles. So we have already introduced E85, and as on today, we are selling it from 40 retail outlets, and we are looking at extending it to 700 retail outlets in National Capital Region, as well as in Mumbai and Pune region. And in the next 3 to 5 years, E85 will be extended to the rest of the country. So, the other important program that we are also looking at is how we can use the excess ethanol for SAF production. When I say excess ethanol, currently for our 20% blending, we require about 8 to 9 billion liters of ethanol. From the very first generation, capacity that we have built, we have a capacity to produce about 18 to 20 billion liters of ethanol today. So we have almost 50% of the capacity unutilized at this point of time. So this is what being considered for E85 as well as for the SAF program. Now, on the SAF program, the initiative was taken early this century. We have developed our own HEFA technology and ready for commercialization. But feedstock has been a challenge when it comes to HEFA technology. Like I said, we have quite a bit of ethanol that is available. We are really looking at ethanol to jet is the most promising, option that we have at this point of time. Government is working on the biojet policy, which is aligned to CORSIA framework, and we are expecting that it is going to be announced in the next month or so. But we have some blending target to achieve 1% by 2027. We are already producing enough to achieve the target in 2027 and 2% by 2028 and 5% by 2030 on international flight. And slowly we will extend it to domestic flights too. So this was the last flight on which I was also there, where we ran it with 25% of SAF blended on it. Now, when we look at the biomethane program, this is a very ambitious program that we have. If you look at the various wasted resources that we have the capacity to produce about 62 million metric tons of biomethane. And the total consumption of all kind of gaseous fuels at this point of time in India is about 45 million metric tons. So in the first phase of the program, we are looking at producing 15 million metric tons by setting up 5,000 commercial plants. 200 of them have become operational already. And, we have various policy enablers at this point of time to ensure that this sector also takes off quickly. We have the CBG blending obligation. We have set the target at 1%, 3%, 4% of blending it with the CNG and PNG. In fact, we had SATAT, which means the sustainable alternative to affordable transportation, and we had policy 1, and right now we are looking at policy 2 to address all the gaps in that, and which is likely to be released in the next week or so. And I think that will take care of all the concerns that the industry has, and we expect huge investment to come into this sector. And one of the byproducts that we get from this industry is the fermented organic manure and liquid fermented organic manure. An ecosystem is being really created at this point of time to make sure that there's going to be, assured offtake of not just the gas, but also the fermented organic manure. These are some of the pictures of some of the plants which are already operational at quite big capacity. Now, coming to biodiesel, I think, achieving 5% blending even by 2030 is a challenge in India because most of the feedstock was being imported from Indonesia and Malaysia, the palm styrene. And, the prices have really gone up and it is not viable at this point of time. While we have taken some initiative to produce our own feedstock, it's going to be a long time before we have our own feedstock. But we are also looking at the other option of producing isobutanol through our agri route. And isobutanol is a much better molecule than biodiesel to be blended in diesel. And a lot of R&D has been going on, and there are some initiative to set up, the production facilities right now. And I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we are looking at setting up production facilities of isobutanol. We are looking at both biodiesel and isobutanol being blended in diesel as we move forward. So we had to wait and see how the market is going to take shape. As far as the green methanol and dimethyl ether is concerned, while a lot of studies have been done and a lot of initiative have been taken by the government to look at green methanol and dimethyl ether, At this point of time, the commercial viability has been a big challenge. However, there are a few plants which are coming up, but green methanol and dimethyl ether are essentially going to be used as fuels for the marine sector and not necessarily for blending with the road transport fuel. So there are a few challenges that we have, though we have so much of agri residues that are available. Creating a supply chain ecosystem has been a challenge, and storage facilities had to be created across the country. And some of the technological gaps that we have, scaling up the challenges, identifying such gaps and scaling up has been a big issue. And we are still waiting for right kind of support from the government on translation project. And byproduct valorization has been a big challenge because we need to really make sure that there is a market created for all the byproducts that are going to be coming from whether it is ethanol industry or from the biomethane or biomethanol industry. Though we have some very attractive pricing at this point of time, the energy-based scientific pricing policy is something that we have to look forward. And the carbon market is something that is still emerging. We need to get the right kind of revenue realization as far as the green attributes are concerned. And then, of course, we need to do a lot more when it comes to impact funding. Though we have the policies, we don't have any institutional mechanism at this point of time to monitor the effective implementation of the policy at the national level. And this is something that we are looking at. And the kind of federal structure that we have in India, though we may have policies at the center, it is very important that the various states cooperate and come up with their own policies which are in tune with the central government policies. This is something that is slowly happening. We have about 7-8 states which have come up with their own policies, which essentially helps attract investment into those states, into the bioenergy program. And one other important aspect is that, as we are growing, it is very important that we have the international cooperation on the technology as well as on the markets in future. So I think I would stop at this and be ready to take questions at the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We very much appreciate it. And it's incredibly exciting and inspiring to see what is happening in India. We're now going to head over to Canada. So we have Mehdi Lokdari, who is an economist with Natural Resources Canada's Canadian Forest Service, working at the intersection of clean fuels policy and economic analysis. He has been a key organiser of international roundtables focused on accelerating the scale-up of clean fuels and reducing barriers to low-carbon fuel production. Welcome, Mehdi.
Thank you for the nice introduction. So good morning for the people on the Australian side. So I'm happy to be here. Let me share my presentation. So it's going to be a short presentation, more kind of.
Mehdi, I'll let you know when it's up on the screen and we can see it.
Okay, so I don't think. Okay, you must be able to see it now.
Yes. There we go. You are up and running.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm working for the Department of Natural Resources. So we're a department that is really covering everything from oil and gas, forestry, mining, and so on, including policy, economics, and also science. I think you see my head in the middle of the presentation, no? Or is it just me?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, so interestingly, so this is a quote for our new minister from last year. I think So yeah, so I don't see it myself, so but it's fine. So I will start with the context, in Canadian context for biofuels. So before talking about biofuels, just I think it's important to know that Canada is a net exporter of crude oil. We are in some years net importer of fossil liquids, sometimes a net exporter. But one of the challenge for Canada is jet fuel. We're importing around 35% of our jet fuel, and it's coming mostly from the US. So we are also producing we're a large producer of biofuels. But right now we're only covering around 48 to 50% of our consumption. Interestingly, I mean, you will see later that we have some mandates, but the day of the mandate has increased. What we have seen is an increase of imports instead of an increase in domestic production. So most of the biofuels are really divided between the biodiesel, the renewable diesel, and ethanol. Today, we are producing much more renewable diesel than biodiesel, but it's also because the last few months we have a new plant, a 1 billion liter renewable diesel plant who started production. So it's explaining why now we're largely independent from an RD perspective. SAF, we don't produce SAF. We have produced a little bit of lower carbon jet fuel from co-processing, but we don't have any dedicated SAF plant. Biocrude is just, I mean, a renewable version of oil that can be blended with in existing refineries. And so it's also a pathway that is very interesting from our perspective, especially because we have a large source of forest biomass, and biocrude is a good product to be produced from forest biomass. And so I will not go into the detail, but you can see on the slide that we have a few companies, and I saw that there's someone from Licella online, so he or she will recognize the name Arbios. We also have some projects around the production of purely SAF, but no commercial scale yet. And so really the only SAF used in the country has been imported from Neste. And if I am not wrong, it's coming from Singapore. So it's not really the best way. So this is just a map of the country with different projects. I mean, probably you will have access to the presentation, so I don't need to go into the detail. So on the policy side, I think it's really why we are here today. So we have those 5 pillars. I will mostly focus on the clean fuel regulation. So the clean fuel regulation is requiring the refiners to reduce the carbon intensity of their fuels. So they have different ways to achieve those targets, including one of the option is using biofuels, but they can also use co-processing or invest in charging station for electrical cars, for example. So it's a way to meet their requirements. One of the challenges, the clean regulation, the clean fuel regulation is a federal regulation with just focusing on the carbon intensity of the liquid of the fuels. But on top of that, provinces have their own mandate, blending mandate for these biodiesel and ethanol. So you can see a few examples of the different mandates. Related to SAF, there's only British Columbia who have its own low carbon fuel standard, which is really looking very similar to the California one. And they have a mandate of 1% SAF starting in 28, going up to 3% by 2030. And right at this stage is the only province who has a dedicated mandate for SAF, and at the federal level, there's no requirement for any. SAF can be a way to reduce the emissions of the refinery, but it's not a requirement to reduce the carbon intensity of jet fuel. So the regulations, they are mostly supporting the demand side. But the experience is showing that demand is not enough to drive the supply. So you need at the same time supporting the supply and having the demand. So the way we're supporting the supply is through dedicated programs. So there's a list of programs that are relevant for to support biofuel production or innovation to go to scale up biofuels. So I'm working more specifically on the forestry side. So we have, for example, this program is called Investment in Forestry Transformation Program, where we are supporting projects that want to build a demo or a small scale, commercial scale plant, and it's covering it's not specific to biofuels, but it's covering biofuels. Recently, a new program that has been started is the Biofuel Production Incentive Program. So it's a program over 2 years. And what is this doing is really giving between 10 cents to 15 cents per liter to the producers. So it's really a liter-based, a production-based program. So as I want to stay in the 10 minutes, so I think what is happening now, and from my perspective, is really the critical part. I mean, you have seen that we are producing and consuming biofuel for a long time, but it's not so easy to increase production. I mean, for example, ethanol, the two larger producer, there are one is Suncor with an oil company and another one with Greenfield with a pure biofuel company. But what you can see in many cases is, for example, the oil industry is investing in biofuel just for their own, just to make their fossil fuel greener, and they're not really interested to produce more than that. So if we want more domestic production, what we need to do is really create an incentive for new players to start production. And I guess we all know what happened a few months ago. And the impact is that now, from the Canadian government perspective, a decision has been taken to increase domestic production of biofuels, and it's seen as a fuel security issue, but also the affordability is also important. And just, I mean, the military is not a big consumer of fuel, but it's also important to have more domestic production for the military. One aspect also is, so what we had just a few weeks ago, we have this, it's a report that is coming the next week, it's called the Growing a Resilient Canadian Biofuel Sector. And it's really a way for the government to have options and look at options to increase the domestic production. On the forestry side, we also just had the Forest Sector Transformation Task Force, which is focusing on the different activities of the forest sector. So at this stage, I cannot provide details because we're in the process of developing a certain number of options that will also support biofuels. But it's going to cover really a large potential. We're looking at the large potential number of options, including offtake agreements, supporting OPEX, CAPEX, and so on. And so in the coming months, you will have much more detail about our new initiatives. What I can say clearly is when there's a political will to make changes, it's happening. And just to finish quickly, the government role is very important, but the private sector is also critical if you want to succeed. And the private sector needs also to be innovative. So I'm just showing a few examples of what is happening in Canada. For example, we have this EcoStra biofuel development opportunity, with really a way to reduce the risk related to the access to biofuel. Integration with existing infrastructure is something that is critical. So we have Green Water, for example, that is integrating RD and SAF production with the pulp mill. We all know that the forest sector is complicated to move the wood around because the density is low. So we have, for example, Enerkem with a spoke and hub and spoke approach. So this is what I wanted to share with you today. As you will have the presentation, I also have 3 slides related to the type of research that our labs are doing related to SAF. I'm not going to go through those slides, but you will see we have three labs. The Kinman Devon, who is more focusing on co-processing. CanMet Ottawa, who is really focusing on biofuels. And finally, CanMet Varennes, who is more specialized on the modeling. And they are also supporting us in our collaboration under Mission Innovation Integrated Biorefineries. So this is what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mehdi. We really appreciate it. We're now going to stay in the region. So I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Jim Spieth. Jim led deployment and market strategy for sustainable aviation fuels at the US Department of Energy's Bioenergy Technologies Office. He also served as chair of the BioFuture Clean Energy Ministerial Initiative and completed a 3-year term as chair of the IEA Bioenergy Technology Collaboration Program Executive Committee. Jim is also the global chair. Oh, hang on a second. Let me skip to the right page here. Of course, our Low Carbon Fuels Alliance of Australia and New Zealand. We are delighted to welcome you, Jim. Over to you, Jim, and I think we have Georgie sharing slides.
Great, thank you very much. So a very quick history lesson in the U.S. biofuels area is that the oil shocks of the 1970s, the global oil shocks, is what really stimulated biofuels interest in the U.S. So there were efforts by the government to assist in ethanol development in the mid-1980s, as well as some biodiesel development. So it really got kickstarted in earnest about 40 years ago. But then midway through that 40-year period, around 2005 and 2007, we had 2 major pieces of energy legislation that called for a large increase in ethanol production. So we had an industry that was producing about 1 billion gallons per year of ethanol in 2005. Once that law was passed and initially called for 2 billion gallons, and 2 years later, the 2007 Act called for, and it's been so long I'm forgetting now what it called for at that time, but it called for eventually reaching 22 billion gallons by 2022. And we passed 2022. We didn't get to 22 billion gallons of ethanol, but we have exceeded in biofuels production this past year over 20 billion gallons of total biofuels production. About 16 billion gallons of that is ethanol. About 1 billion gallons of that is biodiesel. Almost 3 billion gallons of that is renewable diesel, greatly exceeding biodiesel. And then a portion of the other, a little less than 1 billion gallons, includes SAF. And last year, SAF production was estimated to be at about 460 million gallons. So quite a high level of SAF, accelerated over the last couple of years, just as we're seeing globally. However, with a lot of caveats that I'll go into. In addition to the 1G ethanol production, there's major funding efforts and investments put into 2G ethanol production between 1995 and 2015, actually, and a number of commercial plants built, but they were not very successful, unfortunately, just as the India effort reflects. that 2G ethanol development is still ongoing. There's been a lot of challenges, in particular with feedstock handling, and that continues to be one of the bigger technical hurdles. It is being overcome, but it's been a long process. So more recently, and let's go to the next slide, please. In the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a major shift in interest from traditional biofuels and land-based biofuels to SAF, to sustainable aviation fuel. And so in September of 2021, so it'll be 5 years ago this September, a major initiative called the SAF Grand Challenge was kicked off. And it had a long-term goal of, by 2050, displacing all fossil jet fuel, and a near-term goal of displacing or creating 3 billion gallons of SAF, only about 10 to 15% of jet fuel usage by 2030. We're not really on that trajectory now. But so it was this major effort in the US that got the attention of US producers, and I think the attention of many other countries. It was a major catalyst to jumpstart accelerated investments and interest around the globe in SAF. It was, I was at the US Department of Energy then until actually less than a year ago, and it was an exciting time. If we could go to the next slide. It was a time of, in my experience, almost 30 years with the US Department of Energy, unprecedented cooperation across federal agencies. And this chart just illustrates the supply chain, value chain of biofuels production. And in the middle, in the gray boxes, the various acronyms for various federal government organizations that were involved in different stages of the supply chain, and the logos for those organizations. And there are approximately 13 organizations, about 8 major federal organizations involved in that. We're coordinating at just an amazing level. It was the type of thing where we were talking once a week and sometimes multiple times a week. We created major road maps together, long-term plans. And unfortunately, under the new administration, a lot of that coordination has gone by the wayside. So there has been no formal walk away from the Grand Challenge or those goals, but it appears that it is no longer being actively, from what I can tell, actively funded or very actively pursued, sadly. So in the last 18 months, there's been a major shift at the US Department of Energy, my old organization, to priorities on things like nuclear fuels, geothermal, artificial intelligence, and critical minerals. As a matter of fact, my old organization, which was called the Bioenergy Technologies Office, is now called the Alternative Fuels and Feedstocks Office. So they are creating a broader mission over the last 18 months. And we haven't seen a lot of output of new research being funded from that organization yet, sadly. So I think they continue to evolve and to try to find their place in the new administration and in the new thinking of what the priorities are within the Department of Energy. If I could have the next slide, please. I also wanted to show that similar to a country like Australia, the diversity of biomass across the country is vast. You have a lot of deciduous type of trees, and on the coast in the middle is our great grain belt for corn and wheat and soy and canola, etc. So there's a tremendous amount of biomass available, and up till now, it's primarily been the 1G types of corn ethanol and biodiesel from soy and canola as the major biofuels products so far. There's a tremendous report put out by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory and funded by my old DOE organization that is called the Billion Ton Study. It's been updated about 4 times over the last 15 years, and it's available in both a narrative type format as well as in a tabular format that can give feedstock availability data down to the county level. So it's a tremendous resource for companies trying to develop projects in the US. Next slide, please, Georgie. I also wanted to point out that in addition to the federal efforts, there are a number of regional efforts across the country going on. My old organization, we help jumpstart efforts in the Northeast, in Minnesota, in the Pacific Northwest, and in the Southeast. The major players actually of SAF production on the commercial side were initially in Southern California and in Montana. There's a company called Montana Renewables, and as well as in the Gulf Coast around Houston. So the current major production facilities of SAF specifically are in those 4 locations. The major productions of ethanol, of 1G ethanol, is in the Midwest surrounding the Corn Belt. And the interest continues. However, the development in particular of SAF, and I mention that because that's what our focus has been on primarily. The 1G ethanol industry is well established, commercial, sort of on their own, not needing a lot of assistance, although it still receives technical or still receives policy assistance that is a major enabler. Next slide, please. For the future of SAF, there's a very important federal tax policy referred to as 45Z, or Clean Fuel Production Tax Credit. It is not specific only to SAF, but it includes SAF, so it can go to non-SAF fuels as well as SAF fuels. Initially, this type of law was passed under the Biden administration, and for 2 years, for 2023 and 2024, it gave $1.75 to SAF. Under the new administration, they changed the rules slightly in this new production tax credit that came into being in 2025, so just 18 months ago. And they promulgated new rules that are not complete, but these rules are considered a key enabler to future SAF development. They've reduced the SAF tax credit to $1 a gallon. Non-SAF tax credits goes up to $1.75 a gallon. But they've rolled out changes to the bills, and they haven't completed it yet. They haven't completed all the rules, and they haven't completed a very important life cycle analysis model that many of you may have heard of called the GREET model. That is important to defining individual projects' LCA values, which also impacts the various tax incentives at the federal and state levels. So this delay in that model and the rules itself is having a big effect in new projects being developed and projects being financed and really for progress in general. There's a lot of effort to restore the 45Z SAF value up to $1.75 a gallon, and also to extend the tax credit to at least 2031 and maybe beyond. And there's also efforts to make some of these tax credits more stackable with other incentives and opportunities, like the U.S. Department of Energy has a loan program office, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a loan program office, and they've been quite important enablers of early SAF development. But they seem to be, at least the DOE program, seems to be no longer pursuing new projects in the SAF area. There are 2 companies that have loan guarantees under this program. One is the Montana Renewables and one is Gevo, that are still pursuing SAF projects, and we hope they'll be successful. But at the moment, future support beyond those 2 projects is uncertain at the DOE, though it appears the USDA is still very supportive. Next slide, please. I wanted to reflect just briefly that there's a lot of efforts at the state level. There's 50 states. The number of states involved in terms of actual tax credits passed is only on the order of 6 or 7, but they're important states and they're making a big difference, because a lot of these states are allowing the federal tax credits to be stacked with the state tax credits. And it's sort of a matter of, you need everything you can get at the moment to make these early projects financeable and doable. So we're watching keenly as these state incentives get developed. Some of them have been passed, others are still in discussion. But the state incentives and the state regional development is really very much a key to in U.S. development, domestic development of SAF and other biofuels. Next, if I have just a couple more minutes, I'll reflect that at the organization. Next slide, please, Georgie. At a company I'm currently working for, that I co-founded with 4 of the principals, called Aerovita Bio, we are tracking 700 SAF projects globally, and we think, unfortunately, only a small number of them will be built for very common reasons. Largely, often it's a lack of funding, but there's 24 billion gallons potential. We think at most about 4 billion gallons will be produced. The middle chart gives you a sense of where they're located. About over half, or excuse me, about 40% in the Americas, about 40% in Europe and emerging markets in the Middle East, and 170 in the Pacific. And if I could go to the next slide, Ramakrishna reflected on some of the reasons some of these projects are not being built. Oftentimes, technical maturity, they are rushed into commercial stages not enough funding just to do the essential due diligence. Sometimes front-end loading or lack of engineering experience produces initial designs that are a little incomplete or immature. And if I could point to any one thing, or two things, I guess, lack of development capital. This area is still considered risky from an investment point of view, and the combination of policy driving markets and policy uncertainty and subject to time to change over time, just as we've seen in the US administration just in the last 2 years, makes a very uncertain future for financiers and investments. So there's great uncertainty at the moment, unfortunately, even though there's still enthusiasm and a lot of work still to be done in terms of trying to bring these projects online properly and with a proper due diligence and sufficient guarantees, warranties, etc., in realistic timeframes for success. So it remains a challenging area. The future of new technology development, in particular SAF, remains a challenging area in the US and I think globally for similar issues. Thank you. I'll wrap it up there. Be happy to take questions if we have time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jim. It's always great to have you involved. Now, hopefully, fingers crossed, our pre-recorded video from Renato Dutra, who is representing Brazil's Ministry of Mines and Energy, is going to work. Renato serves as Brazil's National Secretary for Petroleum, Natural Gas and Biofuels. With more than 18 years of experience across the energy sector, he holds advanced qualifications in economics and a PhD in science from the Energy Planning Program at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. In his current role, Renato leads national policy across oil and gas, biofuels and energy transition, including Brazil's landmark Fuel of the Future program and its emerging sustainable aviation fuel market. I am now going to throw to Georgie, who is going to hit play.
Distinguished delegates, my name is Renato Dutra and I am the current Brazilian National Secretary for Oil, Natural Gas and Biofuels. It is an honor to be here to share, first, Brazil's journey in biofuel policy, second, our strategy for market development, and third, our flagship decarbonization program in the transportation sector, which is our national biofuel policy called RenovaBio. Brazil has built its foundation on sugarcane, soy, and more recently, corn. You are looking to scale up biofuels in order to support not only the domestic energy security matters, but also to decarbonize the transportation sector, all while navigating the need for international credible sustainability claims and the complexities of the food versus fuel debate that we understand in Brazil that through our experience, it should be better qualified as food and fuel debate. Brazil has walked this exact path over the last 50 years. Of course, during this path, we have made some mistakes, but more importantly, we have learned valuable lessons from them. Today, I stand here having 3 goals with my speech. The first goal is to share with you how we conceptualized our biofuels pathway and public policy and how we integrated this energy public policy with agrarian and environmental public policies. The second goal is to explain how we transitioned from a model that was heavily dependent on government support to a model more modern based on market mechanisms and incentives. Finally, the third goal is to detail how we are preparing our country for the next generation of biofuels and sustainable fuels, including, for example, sustainable aviation fuel for the aviation sector. Fellow colleagues, Brazil's biofuel history did not begin as an environmental initiative or as an energy transition strategy. It began as a strategy to tackle energy security concerns about 50 years ago. In the 70s, during the global oil shocks, Brazil was heavily dependent on imported oil and fuels. Our reaction to this constraint was the creation of the National Alcohol Program in 1975, which laid the foundation for sugarcane ethanol to replace gasoline and to foster our national industry in the sector. The lessons from Brazil's experience is clear. Domestic biofuels offer an immediate buffer against global geopolitical shocks. Apart from these initial challenges, the real turning point for scaling up our market happened in the year 2003 with the introduction of flex fuel technologies for engines. Today, 80% of all our light vehicle fleet can run on any blend of gasoline and ethanol. And alongside this, we implemented robust and predictable blending mandates, recently moving from 27% to 30% in the case of the use of ethanol in gasoline, and moving from 14% to 15% in the case of the use of biodiesel in diesel. These long-term predictable mandates provided the necessary certainty for the demand in order for investors to build biofuel plants and biorefineries, successfully scaling up our domestic consumption and production, directly, of course, enhancing our national security strategy. Expanding biofuel at a larger scale requires a new approach. Governments cannot bear the fiscal burden of endless public subsidies nowadays. In Brazil, our early biofuel expansion relied heavily on two pillars, encompassing both government subsidies and controlled prices for fuels. But over time, this proved unsustainable as a long-term strategy. Henceforth, and to tackle this challenge, we decided to shift the burden of biofuels growth from the public budget to the market itself. And we did this with a multiple strategy. Firstly, by enforcing mandatory blending targets, we created an artificial but a guaranteed market for investments. Secondly, we deregulated market prices, allowing biofuels to compete directly with fossil fuels at the pump. Because, for example, ethanol is produced locally and efficiently, it frequently beats gasoline on price parity at the pump. Consumer decides the future of the fuel he will use. And thirdly, we realized that we needed integrated planning across agricultural and energy sectors to boost crop yields without expanding the agricultural footprint, effectively addressing the food versus fuel debate. In saying so, on the one hand, by investing in agricultural technology and efficiency, we ensured that biofuel expansion created additional income opportunities for farmers, thus promoting energy security, meanwhile increasing food supply. On the other hand, we bring to the core of Brazil's modern biofuel strategy, and perhaps this is the most relevant tool for Asian countries' future. This public policy, which was created in the year 2017, called the National Biofuel Policy, that integrated all the previous public policies for the biofuel markets, was based on scientific methodologies to assess life cycle analysis of the biofuel and introduced market-based incentives and mechanisms in order to commercialize the product. We know that as biofuel strategies evolve throughout time, sustainability claims must be credible, scientifically backed, and internationally recognized. The Brazilian National Biofuel Policy addresses this issue through a robust market-based on life cycle analysis and life cycle analysis based on scientific methodology to assess greenhouse gas emissions. Under this framework, we reward not only the volume of produced biofuel, but also the environmental efficiency of industrial processes and sustainability criteria to qualify the biofuel itself. These tools are based on scientific methodology and are also based on IPCC guidelines to build a full life cycle analysis, or as we say, from well to wheel. This market-based strategy uses mechanisms for both the supply side and the demand side of the Brazilian fuel market. On the supply side, if a biofuel producer, for example, replaces fossil-based fertilizers by sustainable alternatives, or, for instance, uses waste biomass to power their plants, their carbon footprint intensity score improves. For every ton of avoided CO2 emission compared to the fossil fuel alternative, these biofuel producers acquire the right to emit a decarbonization credit. In doing so, the regulatory framework of this public policy has strict eligibility criteria for sustainability, including, for example, zero deforestation. In other words, it means that biofuels produced in Brazil on deforested land after a baseline year are completely not qualified for this public policy. On the demand side, a part of this framework for the supply side, on the demand side, the transportation sector, in the transportation sector, distributors are mandated to purchase these decarbonization credits emitted by certified producers in order to meet annual carbon reduction targets, which are set nationally by our National Energy Policy Council. Ladies and gentlemen, this framework has completely transformed our industry. It first monetizes decarbonization, second, drives continuous technology improvement in the agricultural sector, and third, provides a credible and verifiable sustainability certification that meets international requirements. But as we look to the future, aligning with this workshop goal to identify priorities for advanced biofuels, Brazil enacted in the year 2024 a comprehensive national legislation that complements the national biofuel policy and prepares Brazil to the next generation challenges. We call this legislation the Fuel of the Future Law. Besides the traditional ethanol and biodiesel sectors, focused on the road transportation sector, this law introduced a modern regulatory framework for other sectors as well, including sustainable aviation fuel, green shipping, biomethane, just to name a few. We are also advancing in second generation ethanol made from sugarcane bagasse and agricultural waste, pushing the boundaries of the circular economy into the energy sector, as well as integrating, for example, biomethane from agricultural waste into the energy matrix. At the international stage, expanding domestic consumption and supply gave to our country the economies of scale to become a major biofuel player at the global stage in a context of rigorous international sustainability standards. The Brazilian government is fully convinced that, first, our national biofuels policies, which evolved during the last 50 years, and our commitment to foster global energy transition have together proved that sustainable development, energy security, and food security are not mutually exclusive. And to conclude, Brazil experience offer these three lessons. First lesson, long-term blending mandates and market-based mechanisms are more powerful than short-term public subsidies. Second lesson, life cycle assessments and carbon accounting methodologies are crucial to turn sustainability into a market asset rather than a regulatory burden, and to meet as well international sustainability requirements. And third lesson, integrating energy public policies to agricultural and environmental planning are of core importance to prove that it is absolutely possible to produce food, fuel, and advanced bioproducts in harmony. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay. Well, unfortunately, we have had some issues with our European speaker joining us today. But given how long we've taken in terms of presentations, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And we certainly will be able to do a follow-up session where we can focus on Europe and what's happening in Europe. So now I'm going to ask all of the speakers to turn their cameras on so that we can have a bit of a chat and get into a few questions. Now, back to the questions. Remember, if you have any, make sure that you pop them in the Q&A section, type them into there. So first up, Jim, I'm probably going to jump to you. And I'm keen to just dive straight into SAF and around, do you think that the interests of the airlines in the US have changed around SAF under this current administration?
Sorry, Sean, I think that might have been to me and my
Yes.
internet cut out for a moment. Could you ask that again?
Yeah, sure. It was really around the ambitions of the airlines under this administration regarding SAF, and has there been a shift that you've noticed?
Yes. Well, what I've noticed is not so much what they're saying, what I'm hearing or seeing or reading, it's the lack of the same. They seem to have gone pretty quiet. So I think there's perhaps a feeling that the pressure is off for some of the SAF goals from this administration. And there's also, across all industries, a caution to come across very openly as environmentally motivated as a major priority, sadly. So I think that's had a major, I think the administration's priorities and sort of lack of emphasis or almost putting to shame environmental aspirations or deprioritizing has had an effect across all industries, including the airlines. So I just don't see them being as public, making announcements, but I don't pretend to know from firsthand conversations clearly what they are thinking or what their investment strategies are, if they've changed dramatically, but it seems to have gone pretty quiet, sadly.
Yeah, okay. And following on from that, I suppose, in relation to the administration, do you feel like the states are taking over more of the leadership in relation to low carbon fuel policy and deployment?
I think they're trying, and some states are very effective at that. Minnesota, Illinois, I missed one in my chart, Arizona. A number of them have come out with ambitions that are being very helpful. I believe most producers are still hoping that the federal tax credits will be clarified and usable because they need all that they can get. But the states are definitely raising their hands and showing leadership in a way that's very helpful and impactful, including Washington State.
Yeah, fantastic. And keeping with you, Jim, there was a question that was popped in the Q&A, but you responded to it in the Q&A, but I feel like there's probably a bunch of people that would be keen to hear it as well. So it was around, following the slowdown in the US, will CORSIA and Refuel EU provide sufficient incentive for SAF investments, in your opinion?
Well, as I wrote in the chat Q&A, I think exports are very attractive, particularly for the US, to the EU and the UK. So I think those markets are very attractive. I know many US companies are strategizing, if they're building in the US, trying to piggyback the federal tax credits for production along with state tax credits, but hoping they can still export those as well and retain that bundle of tax credits and then go for incentives overseas. So it's some very careful packaging that many companies are looking at. And if I don't know that many U.S. greenfield plants would be produced if not for also federal and state tax credits available. I don't think they could just rely on EU or refuel, CORSIA or refuel incentives to make it all work out. I'll leave it at that. I think they need a whole bundle of them, including U.S. opportunities, along with packaged with export opportunities.
Yeah, okay, all right. Over to Canada. We have a question in the chat. Is CCS and CCR integrated into the Canadian regulation? Mehdi?
If we are referring to the clean fuel regulation, yes, you can use carbon capture as a way to reduce the carbon intensity of your fuels. So yes.
Fantastic. And we have a question here from Andrea, one of our wonderful members. So she said thank you to the speakers, and she's interested to know which policy levers you think would have the biggest impact in the ANZ market, so Australia New Zealand market, based on how immature the market is, our limited refining capacity currently, and our abundant feedstock. What do you think would be the winning policies that you think that we should be progressing? Jim, I might start with you and then go to Mehdi.
Okay, well, I think I could start early in the supply chain with the fact that I believe our feedstock producers, especially in new markets, really need assistance. And that's a great place to start with some sort of feedstock establishment or production type of incentives. But then I don't think you can beat a volumetric requirement, volumetric production requirement into the fuel pools. And additionally, I imagine the fuel producers would love to have some sort of per gallon or, per liter type of incentive. So if you could have it all, it'd be great to incentivize sort of across the supply chain, the feedstock producers, the fuel producers, as well as the off-takers, if they could all get a little cut to make it work, because no one is going to be making some great margins on any percentage of this supply chain, in my estimation, early on. It has to be very much a risk shared and a return shared opportunity.
Sounds like exactly what we've been advocating for. Mehdi, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So I think clearly you need to play on both sides, on the supply and the demand. One critical aspect is using as much as you can what is already in place. So if you have a feedstock that has an already established supply chain, you need to leverage it. You seem that there's no refinery left, but if you have a refinery, leverage the infrastructure, because you probably have also pipelines and so on. So using what you already have, on this again, in addition to that, I think on the supply side, there's different ways that a government can de-risk a project. It can be direct contribution with funding, but also, for example, offtakes. Or I think there's very different ways to do it, but it's important to be on both sides. And on the demand side, I will say a mandate, but a mandate that can be achieved. Because in many cases, you have very mandates that are very ambitious. You cannot meet them, so you have to change them. And I think it's really also not good for the stability when you're a long-term investor.
Excellent. Ramakrishna?
Yeah, considering the kind of biodiversity that Australia has, I think it becomes very important that you map what kind of the biomass is available where and when is it going to be available to the industry. And the second important aspect is that ensuring that you map various technologies onto this biomass, because each of the biomass cannot be used for every single possible conversion pathways. So I think it is important to do that kind of mapping of technologies onto the biomass. I think that will be important and critical, so that the investor knows what feedstock is available and where, and what is the kind of technology that one need to be adopting. And then comes the mandate part, which Mehdi was talking about. I think the mandates are something that is really going to drive the use of this biomass and adoption of the kind of conversion technologies that we are talking about.
Yeah, fantastic. And keeping with you, Ramakrishna, we have had a question around what are the challenges around feedstock supply chains that you're experiencing?
Well, as I said, being an agrarian society and considering the kind of diversity that we have when it comes to agricultural crops, so it becomes very important for us to really, as I said, mapping where the biomass is available. In fact, we did take an initiative, and we have created, some kind of a document, and also we have used the satellite technology to really monitor, when the sowing happens and when the kind of harvesting is going to happen and what kind of biomass is going to be available, in which part of the country. So we have created a kind of a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer kind of a grid, and this kind of mapping is being done. However, the biggest challenge has been in aggregating this biomass because the availability of the biomass is not all through the year. It's available when the farmer is harvesting his crop. It may happen in short windows of 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 times in a year, and during which this has to be collected and it has to be properly scientifically stored, and it has to be made available to the industry all through the year in the form and factor it is really required by the industry. So things are happening. Now there is a lot of private investment coming into this sector. There are multiple different models that are being adopted. But I think that, the question is here, you have the biomass, the supply chain are being put in place, but industry, also have to take part in creating this kind of a supply chain. Most of the people who are investing into the sector, they're considering the biomass as a commodity it's still not a commodity, though it is available in large quantities. So in order to protect the kind of investment, at least a small part of the investment has to be put in the supply chain, which is not really happening in India at this point of time. So the other supply chain, the aggregators in the supply chain are also facing some challenges because it is not really being considered as an industry yet. And, raising the kind of finances that is really required for creating the kind of supply chain has become a challenge. So these are some of the aspects on which we are currently looking into. And, hopefully, some of these issues are going to be resolved. And creating, like I said, storage part of it. We need to create very large storage facilities across the country, storing some 200, 300 million metric tons of agri residues is not a small thing. So I think a big investment needs to go into that sector. And the government is currently looking at, the what we call as PPP model, where you have a public participation and the village panchayats participating in this kind of a program funded by the federal or the state government. So I think things are shaping up quite well. And I would say that in the next 3 to 5 years' time, these things will be in place, and we may not be talking about the supply chain challenges.
Thanks so much. Mehdi, we're going to jump across to Canada, a couple of questions that we have there. So what role could forestry play in supporting the development of biofuels in Canada, and where do you see that evolving?
Yeah, so traditionally, the forest industry is really producing lumber for construction and pulp for paper and packaging and so on. So we all know that the paper market is not really growing, and the producer of lumber, a large part of their income was provided by selling the residues to someone else. So there's this challenge, there's financial challenge, and this high quality feedstock that is available. And so there's a great opportunity for the development of biofuels. But what is really important to understand is we cannot have the same approach that we had traditionally with fossil fuel, going big and knowing that the bigger it is, the more efficient it is. It's like if it is a case by case. So to have a project successful, and we have example of successful projects, you really need to have the right technology at the right location with the feedstock at the right distance and so on. But knowing that you can also leverage, for example, the pulp infrastructure. Some of them are closed, but others are running at low capacity. And for example, you can use their wastewater treatment, their existing permit, and so on. So there is a strong potential. Just to remember that in a normal season for fires, we're losing around half of Belgium in forest fires. and we're producing more emissions from fires than from producing around 5 million barrels of oil per day. So
Yeah,
the-
wow. And I'm not too sure if you'll be able to answer this one, but we've had a question in the chat around what are the key incentives for biomethane in Canada? Are there certain states that have better policies? Mehdi, is that something that you're able to cover?
Yeah, so biomethane is mostly produced by the agriculture sector, small scale, so not, the most efficient way. I think in the province of Quebec, there is an incentive to inject a small amount of renewable methane into the pipeline system. But to be honest, it's not a sector that is in high development
Right.
right now.
Okay, good to know. Now, we've had a couple of questions here. One, which I'm really fascinated by, which is, are any of the governments, so across the board here today, are any of the governments taking a coordinated approach to investment and policy in more of a biomanufacturing sense? So across food, fuels, fibres, fertilizers, etc. Did anyone want to maybe Jim, what's the US experience in terms of across the board having this kind of connected policy approach?
Currently, I would say there is not, but under the Biden administration, there was, and there even was an effort started in the Obama administration and continued somewhat under the first Trump administration. There was a very, very heavy emphasis and great coordination attempted and going on that was carried into things like the COP in Brazil under the last administration. But then my expectation, though I haven't been witnessing firsthand, is that that effort is probably no longer taking place in the US. I'll just leave it at that.
Mehdi?
Yeah, I think we try to have, for example, a bioeconomy strategy, trying to make it as broad as we can, but it's really limited the number of sectors that are covered. So, for example, you are referring to the fertilizer. It's clearly it's not something that I think we are far from that. And one of the challenges is also the coordination between forestry and ag. I mean, the way we are organized, forestry is under natural resources, and agriculture, they have their own department. So it's challenging and it's really limited at this stage.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Ramakrishna?
Yes, I think, the multiple different agencies have been participating, although we don't have a coordinated kind of an approach. But, so for example, now when it comes to the crop residue management, we do have a crop residue management policy from the Ministry of Agriculture, where they have been giving some incentive on the kind of machineries that have been, that is required for aggregating this biomass, baling it, and stocking it, and things like that. So we have this program in the northern parts of India, where we have humongous quantities of the paddy straw, which is being burnt by the farmers on the field. And also on the, the kind of capital subsidies. We do have both Ministry of Petroleum and we also have Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, who have been giving different kind of capital subsidies. Say, for example, on the biomethane, I did mention about the viability gap funding that we have about $19 billion for advanced biofuels. And as far as the biomethane program is concerned, we do have central financial assistance to an extent of almost 20 million rupees for every ton per day capacity that we build on the biomethane. So that is another important aspect that the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and Ministry of Petroleum has come up with. Besides that, I also talked about some of the byproducts. So, for example, on the fertilizers that we get, the fermented organic manure and the liquid fermented organic manure, the government has come up with specifications for that. And also there is a market development assistance of something like 1,500 rupees per ton of fermented organic manure being dispersed by the Ministry of the Agriculture and Ministry of Fertilizers here. Apart from that, we have some participation from the state governments. When it comes to setting up this plant, you require large tracts of land. Say, for example, some of the states like Chhattisgarh and Uttar Pradesh, they have come up with a policy on the land to be given on a lease basis. Say, for example, Uttar Pradesh gives 1 acre of land at 1 rupee per year on a 50-year lease. So that really helps the investor to bring down the cost of procurement of the land and things like that. So these are some of the things that I mentioned, but there are a lot more things in the offing. Government is also seriously thinking in terms of this kind of a coordinated bioeconomy program. But what has been done today at this point of time is on implementation of these policies, we have an interministerial coordination committee, which looks at the kind of role that each of the ministry that they have to play. And so far, the coordination committee has been able to drive some action at the ground level, but a policy is still in the offing.
Awesome. Well, look, that brings us to our time for today. So thank you very much to all of the speakers that have joined us today, and thank you for everyone that's joined us on the webinar as well. We really do appreciate, especially those speakers, that it's a really dreadful hour right now for them. We will be doing another webinar in a few weeks, and we're going to be focusing that one on feedstocks. So stand by, feedstocks globally, and those countries that are really leveraging and harnessing the feedstocks that they have. So keep an eye out for our LinkedIn, and there will be a short evaluation survey at the end of today's Zoom session if you can take a couple of minutes, because that will also help us put together what are the topics that we need to be doing for the future. We're trying to hold one of these every couple of weeks, so it's great to see so many people participating. Once again, thank you to our speakers, and thanks for joining us, and have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a great day.
Thank you.